visual stories from the forgotten past.
World War II, Chapter 1. Introduction. The shadow of a new storm. The world was exhausted after World War I. Millions had died, empires had collapsed, and people whispered the same desperate promise: never again. But peace was fragile, built on broken dreams and unfinished wounds. In Germany, the Treaty of Versailles had left a bitter scar. The once proud nation was stripped of land, burdened with crushing reparations, and humiliated on the global stage. Soldiers returned from the trenches to a country that felt defeated twice, once by its enemies, and once by the peace that followed. Resentment simmered, waiting for someone bold enough to channel it. Elsewhere, the world looked deceptively calm. The United States turned inward, enjoying the roaring 20s. Britain and France, weary of bloodshed, clung to the illusion that diplomacy could hold back another war. Meanwhile, in Italy and Japan, new ambitions were rising, ambitions that would soon demand conquest and empire. The 1930s began like a soap opera of uncertainty. The Great Depression shook economies across the globe, leaving people desperate for stability. Out of that desperation, new leaders rose. Men who promised strength, revenge, and glory. Behind their promises, however, lurked shadows darker than the world had ever seen. The stage was set, the world was a fragile glass house, and somewhere in its foundation, a crack was spreading. It wasn't a question of if the storm would come, only when.
Chapter 2. Old Wounds, New Enemies. Germany was bleeding, but its wound did not heal with time, it festered. Out of the ashes of defeat, a fiery voice began to echo in beer halls and crowded streets. That voice belonged to Adolf Hitler, a man who transformed rage into rhetoric, humiliation into hunger for revenge. Two broken people, his promises of pride and power were intoxicating. But Germany was not alone in its thirst for rebirth. In Italy, Benito Mussolini strutted onto the stage, draped in black uniforms and dramatic speeches, claiming he would restore the Roman Empire's lost glory. His fascist vision spread like wildfire, a dangerous blend of nationalism and dictatorship. Far across the seas, Japan had its own ambitions. With limited resources and a growing population, its leaders eyed Asia as a playground for conquest. They had already invaded Manchuria in 1931, testing how far the world's so-called guardians of peace would go to stop them. The answer: silence. Britain and France, haunted by memories of the trenches, clung to fragile diplomacy. They watched Hitler defy the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding Germany's army, yet chose appeasement over confrontation. Their hesitation whispered to dictators everywhere, "Push further. We will not stop you." The 1930s played out like a dangerous chess game, but the players weren't equals. The pieces were being moved by men willing to gamble with millions of lives for the sake of glory. The world, unknowingly, was sliding toward another abyss. This was no longer a story of recovery. It was a story of old wounds reopening and new enemies rising, each more ruthless than the last.
Chapter 3. The spark rekindled. The world held its breath in 19, but armies moved in silence. Europe was a powder keg, and all it needed was a single spark. That spark came from Hitler's gaze, fixed firmly on Poland. 4 months, Hitler had played a cunning game. He had already annexed Austria in 1938. The world said little. He seized Czechoslovakia. Again, silence. Each victory emboldened him. But Poland was different. Britain and France, at last, drew a line. If Germany invades, we will declare war. Still, Hitler believed they were bluffing. In the shadows, he struck a shocking deal with his sworn enemy, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was more than a non-aggression treaty. It was a secret pact to carve up Poland like spoils of prey. The world reeled at the betrayal. Two ideologies that hated each other, now shaking hands over conquest. On September 1st, 1939, the storm broke. German troops poured into Poland with lightning speed. Tanks and aircraft overwhelming defenses in a terrifying new strategy, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Entire cities crumbled in days. Panic spread like wildfire. 2 days later, Britain and France kept their promise. They declared war on Germany. The nightmare had returned. The world was once again at war. And yet, for the first month, the war felt strangely quiet in the West. Historians would later call it the phony war. But make no mistake, the fire had been lit, and soon it would consume nations. The spark had become ablaze, and this time it would burn brighter and deadlier than ever before.
Chapter 4. The Fall of Europe. After the strike on Poland, the storm rolled west. For months, the world waited in uneasy silence. Then, in the spring of 1940, Hitler unleashed his fury. What followed was not war as the world had known it, but war rewritten in speed, shock, and devastation. First came Denmark and Norway. German forces swept in overnight, seizing control before their stunned armies could even resist. It was a brutal preview of what was to come. Then, in May 1940, the real hammer fell. Germany invaded France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The French believed their mighty Maginot Line would hold a wall of fortifications built after World War I. But Hitler bypassed it with ruthless brilliance, sending his tanks through the dense Ardennes forest, a route the French thought impossible. The world watched in disbelief as one of Europe's strongest powers, France, collapsed in just 6 weeks. Paris fell. The French government surrendered. Centuries of prestige and pride were crushed under the boots of German soldiers marching down the Champs-Élysées. Only Britain stood alone, defiant but isolated. Across the English Channel, Prime Minister Winston Churchill thundered words of courage, vowing to fight on no matter the cost. But courage would soon be tested in the skies. As France lay defeated, Hitler turned to his next target, Britain itself. The Nazi war machine seemed unstoppable, like a dark tide sweeping across Europe. Nations fell one by one, leaving the world to wonder who could stand against this fury. This was no longer just war. It was conquest, swift, merciless, and total. Europe had fallen, and Britain now stood as the last beacon of resistance.
Chapter 5. Britain stands alone. Europe lay in ruins, its capitals crushed under Nazi rule. Only Britain remained, battered, isolated, but unbroken. For Hitler, it was the final obstacle in Western Europe. If Britain fell, Nazi domination would be complete. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic confrontations. The Battle of Britain. In the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe roared into the skies, determined to bomb Britain into submission. Wave after wave of aircraft unleashed destruction on ports, factories, and airfields. The plan was simple: cripple Britain's air defenses, then invade across the Channel. But Britain had a secret weapon, not just its pilots, but its spirit. Outnumbered yet unyielding, the Royal Air Force fought with daring and resilience. Day after day, young pilots, many barely in their 20s, took to the skies in Spitfires and hurricanes. They faced almost certain death, but their courage turned the tide. When bombing airfields failed, Hitler changed tactics. He unleashed the Blitz, a merciless bombing campaign on London and other cities. Night after night, fire rained from the skies. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Yet Londoners emerged from shelter singing defiantly, refusing to be broken. Churchill's voice thundered across the nation, "We shall never surrender." And Britain did not. The Luftwaffe was repelled, and for the first time, Hitler tasted defeat. Britain's survival was more than a military victory. It was a symbol against all odds. One nation had stood firm against tyranny. Alone, yet unbowed, Britain kept the flame of resistance alive. But across the seas, new powers were stirring. Soon, the war would grow beyond Europe, and the entire world would be dragged into the inferno.
Chapter 6. The war expands from Europe to the world by 1941. The war was no longer just Europe's tragedy. It was becoming the world's. Like dominoes, nations far from the heart of Europe began to fall into the conflict, each pulled in by ambition, alliances, or sheer survival. In North Africa, Mussolini's Italy tried to carve out an empire, attacking British colonies. But the Italians quickly faltered, forcing Hitler to send his most brilliant general, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, whose daring tactics turned the desert into a deadly chessboard of tanks and sandstorms. Meanwhile, far to the east, Japan was growing restless. Hungry for resources and dominance, Japanese forces had already seized vast parts of China. Now their eyes turned toward Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The world sensed something ominous, but no one could predict the shock that was coming. And then, the greatest betrayal yet. In June 1941, Hitler broke his pact with Stalin. In a stunning move, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Millions of German troops stormed across the border in Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. At first, the Soviets reeled, cities fell, armies crumbled, and German soldiers marched deep into Russian territory. Hitler believed victory was certain, but in the vastness of Russia lay a hidden enemy, time. As the brutal winter set in, German forces found themselves trapped in a frozen nightmare. The invincible Nazi machine had finally met resistance, and cracks began to show. Even as Europe froze in battle across the Atlantic, the United States watched with wary eyes. Officially neutral, but supplying Britain and the Allies, America balanced on the edge. Then, in December 1941, everything changed with a single morning of fire and fury. Pearl Harbor, the world's last great power, was now in the fight. The war had expanded beyond imagination. It was no longer a European conflict. It had become a true world war.
Chapter 7. Turning Tides. The world strikes back. For years, the Axis powers seemed invincible. Nations fell, cities burned, and dictators gloated over their conquests. But by 1942, the storm began to change direction. The world was striking back. In the vast Pacific, the Japanese had swept across Asia with terrifying speed. But their momentum met a sudden halt at the Battle of Midway. In June 1942, American intelligence cracked Japan's codes, setting a trap. In a fierce naval clash, the Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk. A devastating blow. For the first time, Japan was on the defensive. In North Africa, the legendary Desert Fox, Rommel, seemed unstoppable. Yet at El Alamein in late 1942, British forces under General Montgomery finally held the line. Churchill declared it was not the end. Not even the beginning of the end, but it was perhaps the end of the beginning. Meanwhile, in the frozen wastelands of the Soviet Union, the fate of the war turned its. Hitler had thrown everything into capturing the city, a symbol of Stalin himself. The battle was a nightmare. Street by street, building by building, soldiers fought with knives, rifles, even bare hands. Winter arrived again, and this time the Soviets encircled the Germans. In early 1943, an entire German army surrendered. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. One by one, the Axis powers began to stumble. The Allies, Britain, the Soviet Union, and now the United States were coordinating, growing stronger, and pushing back. The war that had once seemed like a dark, inevitable march toward Axis domination was now shifting. The tides were turning, but the price of victory would be blood, fire, and sacrifice on an unimaginable scale.
Chapter 8, D-Day, and the fall of the Nazi Empire. By 1944, the Allies had grown unstoppable. Months of preparation culminated in the boldest military operation in history, D-Day, June 6, 1944. The stage was Normandy, France. Over 150,000 soldiers, thousands of ships, and countless aircraft descended on the beaches in a desperate gamble. For months, Hitler had believed the Atlantic Wall would hold, but the Allies struck with precision, cunning, and sheer audacity. Bullets tore through sand, explosions shattered cliffs, and the roar of war echoed across the coast. Men fought, fell, and pressed forward, determined to liberate Europe. The beaches became a brutal theater of heroism and horror. By nightfall, the Allies had established a foothold. The tide had turned. From there, the Allies moved swiftly. Paris was liberated in August 1944, greeted by joyous crowds who had suffered under years of occupation. Resistance movements, once isolated and desperate, now coordinated with advancing armies, striking German positions from within. But Hitler, trapped in his bunker, refused to accept reality. The once confident dictator lashed out with desperate commands, moving troops to late, launching counterattacks that crumbled before they even began. By early 1945, Germany was a nation in ruins. Cities were destroyed, railways torn apart, and millions of civilians fled the advancing armies. Hitler's empire was collapsing. The end of the Third Reich was inevitable, a spectacular fall from power that would forever mark history. Europe's liberation was near, but the war still raged across the globe. The final battles awaited in the Pacific, where the rising sun would refuse to set quietly.
Chapter 9. The War in the Pacific and the Atomic Twist. While Europe crumbled under the Allies' advance, the Pacific was a brutal stage of fire and fury. Japan, relentless and fanatical, refused to surrender. Island by island, their soldiers fought to the death, turning every rock, cave, and coral reef into a fortress of despair. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Guadalcanal. Each battle was a nightmare of blood, smoke, and courage. Thousands of soldiers and civilians died, yet the Japanese fought on, clinging to honor and a stubborn refusal to yield. The United States, now fully mobilized, faced an impossible challenge: how to end the war without losing hundreds of thousands more lives in an endless invasion of Japan. The solution was terrifying, unprecedented, and historic. In August 1945, a new weapon entered the stage: the atomic bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two cities, were instantly transformed into infernos of unimaginable power. Tens of thousands perished in moments, and Japan, finally broken, surrendered on September 2nd, 1945. The world had glimpsed the future of war. A power so absolute, it could end life on an entire scale in seconds. Humanity had crossed a threshold, entering the nuclear age, forever changed. The Pacific had fallen, but the cost was staggering. The horrors of war had reached heights that no one could have imagined, and the survivors would carry the scars, both visible and invisible, for generations.
Chapter 10. Europe in ruins. And at the Cold Dawn, Europe was a shadow of its former self. Cities that had glittered for centuries lay in rubble. Berlin, Warsaw, and countless others were silent witnesses to the cost of ambition, pride, and hatred. The streets were littered with the debris of lives once lived. Homes, schools, and hospitals reduced to ruins. Millions of soldiers and civilians had perished, and those who survived carried scars that no medicine could heal. Families were torn apart, millions were displaced. Hunger, disease, and despair haunted the continent. Amid this devastation, the survivors began to rebuild. Governments collapsed, new borders were drawn, and the map of Europe was forever changed. Germany was divided, Austria reclaimed its independence, and new nations emerged from the ashes of war. But even as peace returned, the seeds of a new conflict were planted. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, their ideologies clashing even as they had allied to defeat a common enemy. The stage for the Cold War was set, a quiet, tense struggle that would dominate the world for decades. The war was over, but the lessons were clear: ambition unchecked by conscience, hatred nurtured by ideology, and the lust for power could destroy civilizations. Humanity had survived, but at a cost that would echo for generations. Europe's streets were silent, but its history screamed, never again, or so they hoped.
Chapter 11. Justice, trials, and reckoning. The war had ended, but the world could not simply move on. The horrors committed by the Axis powers demanded accountability. Nuremberg, a city once central to Nazi propaganda, became the stage for one of history's most dramatic trials. Former generals, ministers, and even doctors faced the world's judgment. The courtroom was electric with tension. Prosecutors meticulously laid out crimes against humanity, while the accused clung desperately to denial, ideology, or excuses. Families of victims watched, seeking justice, closure, or at least acknowledgement of the atrocities committed. It wasn't just a legal reckoning, it was moral, philosophical, and deeply human. Questions burned in every mind. How could ordinary men commit such horrors? Could justice ever repair the pain? Could the world truly learn from the depths of evil? Meanwhile, nations began confronting their own actions and complicity. Cities and communities grappled with guilt, responsibility, and the difficult path to reconciliation. The trials set a precedent. Crimes against humanity could no longer hide behind borders or uniforms. But justice was only a small part of recovery. Europe and the Pacific still lay in ruins. Millions were homeless, and economies were shattered. The world had punished the guilty, but it had also learned a haunting lesson. Even victory came at a terrible, unforgettable cost.
Chapter 12. Legacy of the War. A changed world, the guns had fallen silent. The ashes of Europe and the Pacific stretched across continents. Humanity had survived, but it had been forever transformed. Nations rose from the rubble, determined to rebuild. Yet the scars remained: millions of lives lost, families shattered, and cities erased from memory. The world had glimpsed the abyss and stared into the face of absolute destruction. The United Nations was born, a fragile attempt to prevent such horrors from repeating. Europe was divided, and the balance of power shifted to two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, whose uneasy alliance would soon give rise to the Cold War. Technology, too, had changed forever. The atomic bomb had introduced a shadow that hung over humanity, the knowledge that war could now end life on a scale never before imaginable. And yet, amidst the despair, stories of resilience emerged. Survivors rebuilt lives, nations forged alliances, and ordinary people showed extraordinary courage. Humanity had endured. The war had ended, but its echoes would resonate through generations, a dramatic, tragic, and unforgettable saga. But as the curtain fell on World War II, the world was left with haunting questions. Could peace ever truly last? Could hatred and ambition be contained? And would the lessons of the past be enough to prevent another catastrophe? You can also answer these questions in the comments section. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, please like and subscribe for more history breakdowns.